Good afternoon, good early evening, everyone. My name is Lynette Kwamboka. I do many things. If Mark Kirura is in the room, he wants me not to say that I'm a carpenter, which I am. But I've been in the data space for a very, very long time and started off in the trenches with Al, with Jay, and a few people in the room. And I remember the very first lesson Al taught me when I joined government in 2011, leading the Kenya Open Data Initiative, was whatever you do in government, always document. And many years later, that saved me, and I think I sent you a note to, to let you know about that. I am the executive director at the Institute for Development Data. And what the Institute does is really thinking about Africa's data infrastructure. We have these conversations. I was in last year's conference. We are here today. We'll have another conference hopefully next year, and hopefully I'll be invited. But then the in-between, what do we do in between? I was in India 3 weeks ago for the AI Summit. Folks were in Paris last year for the AI Summit. But then the in-between, what happens there? And that is what the Institute for Development Data is trying to bridge, building the infrastructure. Especially in the not-for-profit sector, you know, there's lots of convenings. In the legal sector, there's lots of documents, policies, strategies. But then the last mile of implementation and operationalization of these things, these policies, these strategies, these conversations, is really missing. So when we think back to where Kenya has come from to where we are, there's always the question of, you know, what's going on and can we see something that is happening? Can we see some of the great examples that we got from governments here today, what they're actually doing, what they're building? My background is computer science, so I am a carpenter with a hammer. So every little problem, my nail is, can we build a product? Can we see? So the Institute for Development Data is really trying to build that for impact, coming in from a private sector mindset of building solutions, but then building those solutions in a way that has impact and building those solutions in a way that improves the efficiency of governments, especially in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know whether that was 2.5 minutes. It might have been more. I taught you better than that. But I'm also happy to welcome Ms. Mercy Kimalat, who has also joined us. Mercy, I'm going to give you 2.5 minutes after Jadida speaks to just plug your organization and tell us a little bit more about yourself. So, Jadida, please.
Thank you very much, moderator. I represent the Kenya Witness Protection Association. This is our first engagement with the East Africa Data Governance Conference, and we feel happy and privileged to be here. The Witness Protection Agency is an independent state institution that provides special protection as a measure of last resort to those who have important information and are cooperating with the prosecutor or other law enforcement agencies, and they are at risk or are intimidated. So our work is governed by the Witness Protection Act, Chapter 79 of the laws of Kenya, and data is very important to us because of witness protection. We know that there is no successful trial without a witness, and therefore when witnesses are at risk or are intimidated or their identity is revealed or any identifying information is revealed about them or their protectors, then it means there will be a challenge in terms of getting justice in court. We receive referrals from both state and non-state actors. Indeed, our biggest referral is a self-referral by individuals who are at risk. I know some of you may be asking, we are hearing you for the first time, where have you been? We have been here, and we work very closely with the Director of Public Prosecution. We work very closely with the National Police Service. We work very closely with the judiciary, because through them, they're able to refer cases to us, and because of the nature of the operation, we do not operate overtly. a lot of our work is covert to ensure that the witnesses and the protectors remain safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mercy, please tell us about yourself.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, I was in another panel breakout session, so that's why I'm a bit late, but happy to be here. So my name is Mercy Kimalat. I'm the CEO for ASEC, which is the Association of Startup and SME Enablers of Kenya. Basically, what we do is that we bring together every type of organization, whether corporate innovation center, you have the academia, university innovation center. We also have NGOs, non-for-profits, and also including incubators, accelerators, venture builders, venture studios, literally outfits that are supporting entrepreneurs across their entire life cycle. So just thinking of an idea, we have pre-incubators helping you take your idea to market. We have incubators, we have accelerators helping you now do the growth stage. And then for scale up and looking for investments, we also have post accelerators as well. So we're a network of more than 200 organizations operating both in Kenya, but also have scaled across East Africa and also the sub-Saharan part. And our mission is very clear. How do we use entrepreneurship as a catalyst to actually solve poverty, at the same time also creating jobs and accelerating impact, especially to the marginalized areas, but also to the marginalized groups as well. So happy to be here. Actually, it's in coincidence that our theme for the year is technology for society. How do we harmonize data, AI, and governance to really ensure we have inclusive development? Because I can tell you for free, if we are only focusing on Nairobi, Kisumu, and Mombasa, then we're leaving out 80% of the country's rich resources, talents that are actually placed in the different regions. So we need to think about how entrepreneurship can be a catalyst to solve some of these different challenges that we're seeing in the community level, but really looking at how to transform a business to become an economic engine that can support the Kenya's GDP. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now that we all know each other, we can go straight into the business of the panel. And I want to start with you, Dr. Mkilia. As a regulator, you know that East Africa's data protection landscape is fragmented. We have different laws, we have different enforcement cultures. In fact, we have even different thresholds for what counts as rights violations. Where would you place the first stake? What would be the first actionable thing that we should do to begin to harmonize at an East African level?
Thank you very much. I think the first thing which we are sure of, we have different milestones in developing the infrastructure for IT, which we have no problem with that because the technology is quite fine, and connecting the technology from the fiber, from whatever, to have the entire East Africa connected is not a problem. The problem is on how we can harmonize. And the first step to me should be on the data flow, cross-border data flow. This is the issue, because it's here where you can touch a very big, complicated situation, which data should be exchanged, how they can be exchanged, to which extent. So getting the integration that we can exchange data, but still the data set can be considered for how much this data can be exchanged. I understand one practical regional initiative would be in developing the trusted cross-border data flow mechanism for the East Africa, such as a framework could define a common safeguard for the data transfer, mutual recognition of regulatory standards, and clear responsibilities for organization transferring data. The second area, I feel it is important initiative will be to establish a regional cooperation network for data protection authorities. And this, we have taken different initiatives within the 2 years that I have been in power. We have several times that we visited Uganda, and we found, all of us, the East African countries. You know, now we are expanding. We are almost 6 or if not 7. So at least we meet with all personal data protection authorities, and we discuss these common important areas on where we can come up and harmonize the legal framework and everything, and then we work together. We have met here, we meet in Uganda, we have met in Tanzania, we have met in Rwanda, and this is tradition is still continuing. That is the first and good initiative, because we don't just meet in words, we meet in person, and the discussion becomes very important. But equally important is the development of regional mechanism for dispute resolution and regulatory cooperation. You know, if we are talking about the digital economy, it is investment across the East African and coming up with a common African market. And to me, is if we create that, it means we are creating a very good trust to individuals that we serve. And for sure, if people, they are very sure that no matter the data is being used from where, and there is data sovereignty, it means the trust will be boosted. And indeed, the cost for investment will be reduced. There is no reason to why we should start a data center in Kenya while there is a data center in Tanzania. So if we harmonize these, the issues related to legal, the data flow, and the data sovereignty, and all this kind of thing, it means we will reduce the cost of investment, and the market will be growing. And at the domestic level, advancing such initiative would require consultation with the national stakeholders, alignment with the existing laws, such as Personal Data Protection Act, and the engagement through regional policy platform. I think we are going in the right direction, and that can make us these things happen.
Thank you very much. Ms. Warohio, the protection of witnesses depends entirely on data systems. Who holds that data? How is it managed? How is it accessed? And so on. And zooming out, not just from a domestic perspective, but even from a regional perspective, because I think the protection of witnesses is regionally relevant. What is an urgent, what is the most urgent data governance structure you think we need to make sure we have in place? And as I ask you that, I'm also asking on behalf of many of these people, how can we help?
Yes, thank you. A significant practice of witness protection is outside the digital technological infrastructure because of the huge exposure and tracking in terms of data identity and the like. But from a security and case management perspective, if we are able to protect the data, and for me, it's not just talking about data protection. For me, it's I would call it data justice. The priority for those who are in the practice of witness protection is how does the data all the time protect the witness even after they are through with the trial process. How do we promote the right to be forgotten? Because one of the significant protection measures is change of identity, which could be temporal or permanent. That means there are people who are in the justice system whose data must be forgotten, and they are created, they recreate a new identity, or they are in the system and their data must be opaque. So for us, that would be a priority that cuts across the regional boundaries because of the nature of transnational organized crime, which is used to collect the evidence for that case. In the same way of sharing that data, priority to how that data is managed in terms of data justice is very critical. And one of the things that we are beginning to do is to develop a model law for Africa on witness protection that has a significant component on matters data and technology, because that is the only way we shall be able to promote that data justice component. In terms of how you can support, one is to appreciate and understand the sensitivities on witness protection measures, to understand how you as an individual can be the first defense in terms of protecting the identity and any identifying information of that witnesses. And when the witness protection approaches you in terms of a person who is of interest to the agency, you need to be very responsive in terms of how then you deal with that data, because then you'll be collaborating and cooperating with the agency to secure the witness and also ensure that the witness is safe for a long time. One of the things that institutions have not done, and a lot of us I know have human resource instruments, there is no mention of how witness protection measures and strategies can be weaved within your human resource documents, or even how they can be weaved within the witness, within the data protection development in terms of infrastructure and also the softwares you develop. Lastly, for us, and on the same request, is how do we innovate with witness protection measures and strategies in mind? Many people are not, many institutions are not ready and willing to work quietly with the witness protection practitioners, because the nature of our work demands that you're always out of the radar. You want to market your brand, you want to market your innovations, and you want to be identified as the ultimate source and innovator of that piece. So that is a major area where we can work together in terms of innovating digital and technological pieces that support the witness protection practice.
Thank you very much. Mercy, let me turn to you and ask. The tech and startup ecosystem, I think, has benefited a lot from general ambiguity of regulations in government. But as we go forward, what did it mean for that industry to move towards ethical data use? Because one of the byproducts of that ambiguity has been violations of data use and rights and so on and so forth. There's also been ambiguity in terms of that. But also, what would you need governments to guarantee before that shift happens?
So thank you for that. And I think it goes back to even why we formed ASEC, right? So ASEC was formed back in 2018 as a formal entity. But if you trace back how we started as being a digital hub, was literally when we laid the first sea cable, right? Back in 2009, 2010, which created pathways or a railroad on how innovations can actually thrive through technology. At this case, mostly software technology. And from there, we have seen many startups coming up in different sectors. As you know, it has gone through the evolution. So we started with EdTech, then went to agri, then healthcare, and now we're seeing a lot more innovations around the green tech and circular economy. And there are more that are coming up. If you're looking at the blue economy and many others as well. But the key thing is always, how does a startup actually get to innovate? One, the cost of accessing research is very high. Right? And so if you're trying to work with universities to access publications, you find sometimes the data is, one, outdated, or two, does not cover the emerging sector. Like back in the day, most people are not talking about cybersecurity. And so right now you're seeing that most people actually had to go to another country, mostly international, where they can get access the knowledge, access the tools, and even technology to be able to build upon those different frameworks. But we're seeing that now with the cost of technology actually becoming cheaper, then startups can actually now have access to larger information or data sets to actually build and innovate. So around the violation, I'm not so sure, but I think it was around, if you're working with a scarcity in terms of research, then how do you go about it, right? And then the other key thing that startups actually need, and even SMEs, is around how they can collect, manage, and secure their own data. So at this point, it's mostly been manual, because again, if you're looking at the cost of even integrating a digital platform, the cost becomes too high. And you're finding that also it was mostly international companies that were providing data platforms or even technology software where startups can SMEs can leverage. But now with startups coming up in different sectors, we found that startups are coming up with a low-cost model that are really supporting SMEs to digitize, meaning they're actually able to embed technology within their business model, and that actually helps them to scale. A simple example is if you're looking at agriculture. Now we're thinking around how do you do precision farming, how do you leverage different data sets to even do geospatial mapping, so that even as you're advising farmers, they know which areas to plant, at what time, and be able to also keep track of the records, so that even as they're approaching a bank or an investor, they actually have that data secured. But then again, the cost, the question becomes, one, is the data secure? Like what you mentioned, you can find other people now tapping into your own data that you have even paid for, or could be actually proprietary, because there are no safeguards around that. So that is why, again, we need the government to come in, and not in a top-down, rough moment, but more on collaboratively working with the startup ecosystem to define these codes of sharing information and even the data standards. I know the Office of the Data Protection has been set up, which actually is a signal, not only within Africa, but even globally, to different investors who now know that there's a framework that is instituted that actually will protect and govern these different data sets. The other key thing that also we need to look at is how can we ensure that there's transparency and also enforcement amongst the ones who actually misuse data. Because again, if the startup is continuously innovating, that innovation becomes an intellectual property. But the question again is, where can they safely store it? Now, unfortunately or fortunately, we are leveraging international platforms. I don't want to name names, but there are some international companies that have offered that service. But guess what? We are putting Kenyan IP on a global platform and possibly paying a small fee. What does that mean? It means that we are actually, quote unquote, selling out our technology to a global market where the Kenyan government also does not have eyes into it. So again, we also need to be in those different rooms negotiating on the different bilateral agreements that we sign with different countries, so that we also have data sovereignty and ensure that we even look at how can we invest in the data centers, or even looking at how we can support county governments have their own local server for the county, instead of everything being relied on an international company server, for example. So we need to definitely look around that. And then finally, also looking at having transparency by design. And by this I mean, how can we form multi-stakeholder platforms when it comes to looking at designing data systems? Having only the startup ecosystem is not enough. We need to bring in academia. We also need to bring in the investors, bring in the actual entrepreneurs, who are the startups and the SMEs, bring in also government and also civil society, because it becomes a multiple collaboration to achieve the same goal. Again, if we're able to come together through collaboration, we can design the data system that works for us, for Africa, and then we can actually look at how we can leverage the data that has been stored to now come up with different information, different programs, different products and services that can scale. A simple example is if you look at the Kitenge, right? So the Kitenge has always been in our African culture, has been taken pictures of, etc. We promote it during different tourism events when we host different delegations, but no one has actually taken time to document it. Yes, of course, we have the Kenya Intellectual Property Institute, but they also need ecosystem support to ensure that we are also commercializing some of those innovations to commercial products And guess what? When we commercialize them, we create enterprises. Enterprises go and create jobs. Now, bring it back to the East Africa context, because we're in an East African forum. Kenya is a digital hub for East Africa, right? So if we get it right, then we can anchor our best practices within the East Africa community, who can now translate it across the region, so that we also protect our interests as well. A simple example is when you see what happened with the finance bill. Some of the different clauses were not passed in Kenya, but guess what? They were passed at East African level. So we also need to be thinking East African, need to be thinking Pan-African, and also thinking globally, so that now we ensure that our interest is also catered for, and we also have a voice at the table to shape our policy, funding from the government, how infrastructure is built to ensure our data sovereignty, but at the same time also we're able to create enterprises out of the information that we've collected over the years.
Thank you very much. In fact, because I'm going to be inviting lucky 3 people to ask questions from the audience, or to engage us, give comments from the audience. But before that, I want to ask Lynette to build off of where Mercy has just left. There's issues of sovereignty, number 1, but there's also issues of the current work that is being done or being started around harmonizing how Africans are going to manage their data. There's the questions that Dr. Mkilia has just talked about in terms of cross-border data flows and so on and so forth. You think about infrastructure, and so I want to ask you, what mechanisms do you think we need to consider as non-negotiable as we go into the next phase of life? You have been in this sector from when we were doing just open data to when we were putting in place a lot of the infrastructure that is there now. So now, as we're thinking about building on top of the existing infrastructure to cement our sovereignty, to increase our cross-border business, and so on and so forth, what are the non-negotiables that you would need in place, or we should all have in place?
Great, thank you very much. In fact, I'll take it back to where he started before I get here, and challenge us to think about the concept of sovereignty. When we talk about sovereignty, and now there's, of course, sovereignty as a service where, you know, companies, big tech is saying, oh, you want sovereignty as a country, we'll sell it to you. Or sovereignty washing, where it's everyone says we are sovereign. But think about it, what is sovereignty? Having that independence to be able to stand on your own when it comes to something. But then, do we have the fundamentals? Do we have the right skills to be able to do that? If today we said Kenya or Tanzania or Uganda will do its own AI, we are not going to depend on anyone. If we locked everything down, is Konza ready? You know, do we have the right infrastructure? When I was doing open data, maybe 14 years ago, I remember I got into a lot of trouble with the board because open data was hosted on Amazon Cloud. And I was being asked, you know, why is Kenya's data on the Amazon cloud? But that's around the time that the government's data centers went down because the funds stopped working. So when you think about things like those, and the fact that they have not changed since then to where we are now, I mean, a lot of progress has been made, so that's not to say that everything is still, you know, at ground zero, but a lot of progress has been made, but is it enough? So when we talk about sovereignty, we have to think about that. My second thing is investments. Are we making the right kinds of investments? I was a technology lead for the development of the Kenya AI strategy, and a few people in the room, you know, were working on this. It was launched last year. Part of that document was the implementation roadmap, where, you know, we curated the budgets and the different items of the budget that will be needed. It's been almost exactly a year, actually, since it was launched. It was launched on the 26th of March last year. Has the government put any of these things on budget to say, because there are things that we say need to be there. We need to change the education system. We need to, you know, build the green data center in Naivasha, Nakuru County. We need to invest in, you know, skills. Have those things happened? Just a few months ago, the president came out and admitted that he might have blindly signed, you know, this agreement with Microsoft not knowing that it needed half the power that we generate in Kenya to be able to run it. So we really need to start thinking about the fundamentals. And I really like what he talked about because I've been kind of a big champion of that. How about we take an African outlook and we say, what is Kenya really good at? Let's invest in Kenya doing that. What is Tanzania good at? What is Ethiopia good at? What is South Africa good at? And then we have a Pan-African approach to AI sovereignty. Because if Kenya says we want to do everything, Tanzania is also going to come and say, you know, to what you were saying, Mercy, we also have our own interests. So why should we keep our data in Kenya? Because what cross-border data transfer also means is if Tanzania changed their laws about access to data, that affects your data as well if it is stored there. So those are some of the things that we need to think about. So sovereignty is, you know, is a very complex topic, both in its implementation, but also, you know, in its value. So we need to think about it very critically and see how it's supposed to happen. To what Mercy was also saying in terms of, you know, harmonizing how Africa manages its data and some of the things that we need to do. For me, the non-negotiable here is we really need to invest in our own systems, as Kenyans, as Tanzanians, as Ugandans, as Africans, generally. A lot of times, I think yesterday, there was a session and someone from UDPK said, you know, a lot of times a funder would come and say, this is the program that I want you to implement for people with disability, for example, and that's what goes. And you do not have a say because you're not making the right investment. So when I think about how it's the private sector that has been left to hold, you know, a lot of the load that comes with AI, that comes with data. But then we keep saying the private sector, you know, is not behaving ethically, it's not doing this, but they are the, you know, the ones who are calling the tune, right? Because they are the ones who are making the investments. Why can't our government make the investments? And then second to last, in terms of the non-negotiables, I personally think we have enough laws. We have enough laws. You know, there's lots of policies, there's lots of, you know, strategies, there's lots of bills, there's lots of acts. I'm of the opinion that, you know, we should strengthen the Data Protection Act. We should strengthen the Access to Information Act, because today we will try to regulate artificial intelligence. Quantum computing is coming. Then we will start to try and regulate that. The next thing is coming. So I feel like we are perpetually stuck in this cycle of regulation and development of strategies and frameworks and documents and everything. But then we are not taking that effort and that investment and putting it into the development of actual products. When we talk about ethics and representation, you know, we like to say the products that are being developed are not representing us, they're not ethical. They're being, you know, they have the ethics of the people who've developed them. They have the representation of the people who've developed them. So for us to be represented, we need to be the ones who are developing these products. And there's a question of, are we making, you know, the investments to develop these products? There's very little of that. Are we making the investments for our universities? In Kenya, we know that last year our universities were closed because, you know, people are always on strike for one reason or another. Think about Stanford, Harvard, you know, Yale, and the rest. When did you hear that they were on strike? A lot of that, just over lunch, I was having a conversation with actually someone who works at Yale. And we were talking about the engineering programs in some of those places. So I would like for us to shift that narrative and start investing in our own capacity, in our own development. Let's start investing as people, or a people of this region, as governments. Let's start investing in our own production. Because if we're caught up in the documentation and in the, you know, writing of documents, we are not doing much to really move forward. Let's invest in entrepreneurs, let's invest in the right programs. Thanks.
Thank you very much. In fact, I'm a big fan of a TV show that was there in the 70s. It's a hard show to find, but if you check online, you will find it. It's called Yes Minister. It was a satire show. You really must watch it. It's extremely funny. But one of the things that the PS in that show says to the minister is that when we don't want to do something, we make sure that we write a big paper about it, a new policy framework, and we capture whatever it is that we want on the front page, right? So I see somebody recognizing that show. It's a very valuable show to watch when you're thinking about how sometimes policy works. We don't need any more papers. We have written enough. Maybe it's time for us to get into action. I'm going to open the floor to us to give 4 questions before we close and go and drink some uji. Going once. Going twice. I'm looking as far as that end and as far as that end, and I don't see any questions, so I think going thrice. I have indicated to my boss Ajulu that nobody has questions, although one late entrant has come.
Thank you. My question basically goes to the data protection, because for me it's a new, as you mentioned, I mean, it's a new...
Witness protection.
The witness protection, yeah. How do you have policies that indicate how organizations, for example, can build or can more or less onboard the specification or the areas that you want us to get into? We do programs. I work for, with Open Institute, and this to me is like, we normally talk about in SDG, leave no one behind. It's a people group that we are not aware of. How do we identify, how do we onboard them, how do we work with you so that we are able to onboard them in our programming and stuff like that? Do you have mechanisms around this? Are there organizations that are already working with you in this nature?
Okay. I see a question back there. Go on.
Okay, my name is Moses Wango from Shapers Youth Network. So my question is to the speaker, the lady from, the second lady from the other side. I didn't get your name, I came in quite late, but I like your approach to Pan-Africanism and the inward kind of approach towards addressing Africa's challenges as on matters AI and even digital development. But my question is, don't you think that with the pace at which technology is moving, then we'll still be caught up in the same vicious cycle of regulations and policies? Now considering that we had the Malabo Convention in 2014, it only came to force in 2023, about almost a decade later. And within that time, it took about, we were just trying to get 15 members on board. So in a span of 9 years, trying to get 15 members of African states on board just to make a policy work. Don't you think that we should just move on as countries, as individual countries, rather than trying to move as a bloc? So that's my question to you.
Thank you. I think that was for Lynette. Any other question? I'm seeing one right at the end there.
Hi, my name is Winnie Kamau from the Association of Freelance Journalists. And my question is about, Lynette, you talked about sovereignty, but also when a commissioner also talked about let's not build many data centers. Let's have maybe a data center in Tanzania, if I got you right. I'm trying to think about the infrastructure sovereignty in Kenya or even in East Africa. How do we collaborate so that we can move as a community? how does that infrastructure sovereignty look like in East Africa, in EAC? How does it look like in terms of sovereignty infrastructure, where currently we are not even able to speak as a team? And how do we harness our data? Just a simple fact that if I go to Tanzania, I need to get a SIM card in Tanzania. If I come to Kenya, I need to get a SIM card. But if I go to Uganda, I need to get a SIM card. How are we able to harmonize all this so that we move as a team or as a community that we are?
I hear that is very much for Dr. Mkilia. And you know, Dr. Mkilia, as you are thinking about answering that, there's anecdotal evidence that sometimes the East African peoples themselves I don't want to say they don't like each other, but they have tensions between them, the social tensions between them. And sometimes that does interfere with how policy comes about. So as you're thinking about what the East African framework might look like, and as you're answering that question, please maybe see how you would address that. But I will start with Jadida first to answer the question. I hear it's yet another question about partnership. It's another question thinking about how can we help, how can we work with you, and do you have mechanisms for partnerships?
Thank you very much for that question and the continued interest on how do we work with each other. Indeed, for me, as I sat through today, the last breakaway group that was speaking about storytelling and the marginalized group really was very close to my heart because I could identify with their struggles there. Any one of us, I think if we start with a perspective that any one of us in this room, the witness. There are a number of things that I cannot speak to as I sit here because of the nature of work. But the law itself, the witness protection law, is very clear in terms of how to provide that security of information or data protection. And there are already inbuilt mechanisms that are there in terms of witness protection measures, in terms of how do you distort the identity and the like. It is up to us, and I like what Lynette is driving us to be our own creators and to control our own digital development. Because yes, there are institutions that have shown interest working with us. Yes, there are institutions that have innovations that we would like to use, but we hesitate. Why? Because of the issue of sovereignty. So therefore, for me, this is a great opportunity to support a group that is within the marginalized category, but we hardly remember. Just like the way I was forgotten in this panel. Not because I do not exist. I have no problem with that. Not because we do not exist, but because of the nature of work. So we have an opportunity, and this is what I'll leave you with. Let us think about the innovation that we can develop. Let us think all the infrastructures, the AIs, and everything that we are developing. Let us think, if there was a protected witness in this process, what is the back route for that witness in terms of staying within that network and exiting out of that network? So for me, just think about our acronym, Witness Protection Agency, WPA. Witness Protection Accommodation. That's the way I would leave it. Because in the realm of persons with disability, we ask what is the legal accommodation for them. So ask yourself, what is the accommodation that you can make for the witnesses that is necessary, because it is a necessity of life and harm, that is appropriate, and I'm just getting you to think in terms of both the infrastructure, the hardware and the software, that is reasonable to secure their life. What are the adjustments that we need to make that are tailored for witness protection? How do we facilitate that access in and out of that whole digital infrastructure? We have said, the panel has said, there is enough law and policy, yes, but they don't speak to each other. A lot of them do not even speak to elements of witness protection. From an environmental perspective, how do we modify the environment in terms of the infrastructure to suit witnesses? And for me, we are able then to innovate, then to develop the software systems to support, and then to all be responsive, then we will be able to do that. As an institution, we have pioneered the Africa Witness Protection Association to begin helping us think through, as Africans, as Kenyans, how to work with the issue of data security, data protection, the whole realm of data governance. So it is, we are available, but with our very many sensitivities. So we are ready to have a discussion and explore areas of working together so that we can strengthen witness protection, not only in Kenya, but within East Africa and Africa, so that each country is speaking to each other. And when there are reciprocal arrangements, then data governance does not become one of the issues, because we'll always be opting out, we'll always be manual, and yet the region, the world is going digital, and we cannot afford to be out of the digital environment.
Thank you very much. I think what I hear is come and see you, and we can evaluate. Dr. Mkilia.
Thank you very much. The question was really very interesting. Why are we getting different SIM card when you are in Tanzania and then in Kenya, again, you need another SIM card? But I can see there is a milestone on it, because I was receiving calls while I'm here and I'm using Airtel. I can look at it in two perspectives. The first perspective is technologically. In the technology, we start with the identification of an individual. And here where we were talking about the issues related to data localization, data sovereignty, and the data governance. So based to that, it means it will reach a point when we encourage data localization and you want to exchange this information from Tanzania to Kenya, the answer will be like not transferring the entire data set, but just to justify whether is he a Tanzanian or a Kenyan. When it is yes, it means anything which happens, it will be very easier to trace, provided we have harmonized the laws. So we have not reached yet there. But what I understand, we all do the same thing. In Kenya, you have the digital identity. In Tanzania also, we have the foundational services which amount to digital identity. And this is where the issues of identification will come from. But importantly, I was saying initiative should be in establishing the regional cooperation, and this is what we have been doing, and particularly when we are dealing with cross-border data flow. When we are talking about cross-border data flow, it means we establish data ecosystem or data federation from which can be exchanged in a secured manner, considering our laws, our policies, and whatever is existing. And this assignment, we have been engaged already. So to me, very important thing is attitude. Do we really need to get these things done? And indeed it is, because by doing that, we can embrace what we are looking at, and particularly when we are talking about the digital economy, from the investment perspective to implementation perspective, but also increasing the trust and the relationship between East African countries and maybe Africa in general, if at all we will all embrace the Malabo Convention and having the framework that is needed for the data sharing within the industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And finally, Lynette, I think there was a question to you.
Yes, and for me, I really think when you're talking about the Malabo Convention and some of the issues, I like to think that where there is a will, there's a way. If, the AU can come together and vote for a president, they can surely come together and come up with structures for voting on issues like data protection, privacy, security, and things like that. So possibly there's no will, And those are some of the governance issues that need to be put in place. I think we really need to put in place the right kinds of governance, and then trust, as he has said, regional cooperation, collaboration, versus how we think about it. We are better than, that president is, or that country is smaller than us. Think about, the global maps, etc. But then when we're talking about some of the issues, for instance, what Winnie has talked about in terms of SIM cards. Remember, for Kenyans at least, just a few years ago, if you're on Airtel, you're on Airtel. If you're on Safaricom, you're on Safaricom, until there was mobile number portability, right? So some of these issues are devolved in our sense at country level, and they can go to the regional level. So there's a way that we can think about it and kind of solve them, because some of the solutions are easily, findable. And an example that also comes to mind is the fact that, and I know that especially techies talk a lot about this, the fact that we trust a local company called M-Pesa. I hope they increase the sponsorship for Uji, but called M-Pesa, can handle billions of transactions, and we trust them with our money, and they're local. But then to do our election, we must bring in an infrastructure company from outside to print our election ballots that each voter will spend less than 3 minutes on. We have to print it outside. In that sense, we don't trust each other to do the right thing. So for me, it just goes back to trust issues, really. So if we can build trust within ourselves, but also building trust in data systems. One of the things that I've also been trying to champion is using local data. I've been very impressed by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. They come on TV and give the status of like, this is our population, this is what we're finding from the GDP, this is our maize production. And then, a minister would go and contradict them, but then, this is government to government, so we just watch. But then in that sense, you start to build trust amongst people that statistics actually work, data works, information is important. Can we invest in a lot more of these systems? Unfortunately, because of politics, these kinds of institutions will be defunded because then they have contrary opinions. So we really need to build trust, establish clear governance, structures, and just try to collaborate a little more. Because if we try, as I mentioned, the example of trying to build the Microsoft Government of Kenya data center, which is, stalled because there isn't enough electricity. Would Ethiopia come into the group chat and say, hey, we can, give you electricity if you bring it closer to the border with us and stuff? So those are some of the conversations we should encourage.
Thank you very much. Somebody is looking at me with very harsh eyes saying, wrap it up. So I'm gonna allow Mercy to just give us a statement in a minute in closing, and then we shall hand over back to Philip so that he can smile again.
So I just wanted to touch on the aspect of infrastructure because it's one of the key pillars, right? If you're talking about developing an economy. And yes, that takes a lot. It's actually more of CapEx, right? Which can result into multi-billion-dollar projects where you have to go through tendering process, etc. But there's another element if you look at the innovation ecosystem whereby, as ASEC, I can use an example, we use what we call network infrastructure. So as an association, because we have organizations on the ground, different grassroots communities, both Kenya and across East Africa, what we have done is we created a code of conduct amongst ourselves, and then we actually leverage the data that we have within our network so that we also reduce silos, duplication of efforts, for example. So a simple example is if we're running a call for applications on a different program, you can easily receive more than 5,000 applications, and you're only ending up to pick 20 entrepreneurs. What happens to all the 4,880? What do? We pass it on to the next person who may not have to go through the entire process of recruiting entrepreneurs in the program. What does that do? You start to build trust. At the same time also, we get to know whose strength is in what sector or what expertise. Meaning, even as a community, you get to shape how you design different, whether it's surveys, whether it is data flows, whether it is even a conference like this, to be able to see how can we move as a network forward, because the mission is clear. We must advance entrepreneurship for socio-economic development. And how do we do that? Is that when we are organized in a community, then we have a clear way of operating, and we have a clear governance structure of how we collect data, how we manage it, and also how we use it. Then it becomes easier, because now we can look at how we can reduce competition in a very small market. I know Kenyans are very competitive, but if you're looking at East Africa, we're more than 400 million people. If you're looking at Africa, we're more than 1 billion. If you're looking at the world, it's trillions, right? So then how can we reduce competition internally and really build up on that? The other final thing that I'll say is, where there's a challenge, there's an opportunity to use entrepreneurship or innovation to come up with a new business model. And that's what we've actually been able to do, where we support entrepreneurs to pivot their businesses to now become micro data centers, or even be able to create different platforms that can really help a larger pool of other enterprises to leverage. So can we also start thinking about new business models that can actually support enterprises to come up with solutions that can address that? And the final thing is ownership. Yeah, I want everyone just to point forward. Just have one finger pointing forward. How many are pointing back? There are 3, right? Are there 4? Okay, one is to God. Thank you so much. But the 3 fingers mean there's more ownership on us. When we're talking about policy formulation, the government does a lot in terms of public participation forums. And when we do the call out, most people never turn up. So even for us, as a parting shot, please, when we call for public participation forums, please show up, give your voice, help shape that direction. Currently, the Kenyan government is developing the AI and policy, I think it's policy strategy document, and they've actually been able to do it in different parts of the country. Have you been part of it? You can go back to the ASEC page and see what we've been done and get the form where you can actually fill in. Because you know what? Your voice matters, no matter how small you are, wherever you are, and even your sector, whether you're academia, just an investor, just a student, your voice matters. So please, when the call for public participation shows up, the first thing to do is to own that process. And how do you own it? Show up, give your feedback, write the letters. I'm sure the government also receives them, and that is one step to also having a sovereign ecosystem. Thank you.
Show up is the message, and we need to collaborate a lot more. We need to take ownership. Thank you very much to my panelists. Please give them a round of applause. And I am happy to hand the program back